everybody. Now it's Outlook 2025 with the Financial Markets Authority CEO, Samantha Barrass, followed by a fireside chat with political reporter Jack Tame to delve further into the key issues raised in this regulatory keynote. As most of you will know, Samantha has returned to New Zealand after several years overseas and brings an absolute wealth of experience to the role of heading up the FMA. And the FMA has a busy agenda, just some of the mahi going on. In the context of its expanded remit is a strategic change program, an evolving role as New Zealand's conduct regulator of financial markets with a consumer outcomes focus, and using its enforcement powers against misconduct. There's a lot to cover in this Outlook 2025 keynote, so I will welcome Samantha and then welcome back Jack.
Enga maunga, enga hoe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No inga rangi o kutupuna, no reira ka mihi ki te whenua o Greenwich me te awa Thames. Ko Ngāti Ranana ki te patonga te iwi. I whānau mai o I ranana. Engari, I te wai tamariki ana aho, I tipu akeo ki ototahi. Ko te whanganui ātara taku kāinga noho naiane. Ko Samantha Barrass taku ingoa. Ko taku mahi ki te mana tatai hoko hoko, ko te mana whakahaere. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka huri au ki te reo ingarihi. By way of a very brief, loose translation, my personal story is that of a child of South East Londoners, those South East Londoners who worked in the factories and built the docks and wanted better lives for their children. And in pursuit of this better life, my family moved to Christchurch when I was a very little girl, and we thrived. And although I have pursued a career and had my family in the UK and Europe since my late 20s, it is my absolute pleasure to be back here in New Zealand, reconnecting with friends and making new ones. My thanks and congratulations to the Financial Services Council for arranging such a successful event. This is my first FSC conference, and if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it's the value of taking the time to meet in person, to kōrero. It has been a pleasure to meet so many of you over the last few months, and I'm delighted to be here in person to speak to you today. Growing financial confidence and well-being in Aotearoa is the aim of this conference. It's a great aim, and it's an aim that can be best achieved by us all working together to help people lead the lives they want to live, enabling opportunity and improving their well-being. By putting consumers at the heart of what we do, we can support Kiwis and support their lives and improve their well-being. And this is something we can all get behind, and it is to the outcomes we need to achieve and how these will help grow financial confidence and well-being that I want to talk to today. We're in a period of significant change for the industry, for consumers, and for us as regulators. And the new requirements for financial advice aim to give consumers better access to quality financial advice. The climate-related disclosures requirements means those businesses affected will need to publish climate statements. And the conduct of financial institutions regime will require banks, insurers, and non-bank deposit takers to treat customers fairly. Consumers are looking for greater accessibility, and this includes the seamless digital experiences that they reach through their preferred channels. But also for others, it means continuing access through more traditional means. Many want to invest in products that take environmental, social, and governance factors into account. And if we combine all of this with global economic conditions where we have rising and volatile prices, fragile supply chains, and rapid monetary tightening by central banks, and as Minister Robertson said to us this morning, we can see the strains being placed on economies the world over. With all of this going on, it's important not to lose sight of the outcomes we want to achieve and the value we look to deliver for all in New Zealand. Regulators around the world are increasingly recognizing that regulations and rules are simply means to achieve fair outcomes for consumers and markets. They are not an end in themselves. And the overall outcome we must together build for New Zealand is a genuinely fair financial system, with more New Zealanders than ever believing the financial sector is working well for them. For me, this means consumers will be getting better, competent advice on products they have confidence in, that they understand and are priced fairly and are suited to their needs. Our approach to this will be driven by the principle that the firms you run, the boards, the management, are always and have always been better placed than us to determine the actions needed to achieve this objective. You know your business better than we do, and that means we must genuinely share the common purpose of a fair financial system that works for all and share a strong understanding of the outcomes that will get us there. There will need to be even greater engagement and mutual understanding between the FMA and the industry, building on what we have today. We will be defining the outcomes that we are seeking through our regulatory requirements, but it is for you to find the most effective way of delivering them. And that's a really important change in the way ahead. We need to make sure that everyone can access essential financial services and that strong protection for vulnerable customers is secured. And we want to build, for our part, the FMA's understanding of all consumers' perspectives and experiences, Māori, Pakeha, Pacifica, all the peoples and cultures of our communities. I see our role as a kaitiaki, guardians of conduct in financial services for Aotearoa. And this is our vision for the long term. And the FMA is very much in its early stages in its Te Ao Māori journey, and we're encouraged that so many of you are already embarking on yours. Internally, we are deepening our understanding of the Māori economy and looking at ways to improve access to, amongst other things, capital, building on our relationships with colleagues across the government and the industry. And it's likely that we'll be reaching out to some of you for assistance, so please do help us with your knowledge and understanding. So what does an outcomes-based approach mean in practice, and how does it help to deliver financial confidence and well-being? Well, some things don't change, and I think are pretty obvious. You should always be asking yourselves the question, am I treating my customers as I would expect to be treated, as I would expect my mum and my dad and my family to be treated? Are my customers getting the outcomes from my products and services that they expect? These are real basics. One thing that strikes me in financial services is that at the outset, it can be incredibly easy to buy or purchase a financial product. I'd encourage you to pose yourselves the counter question as to whether it's as seamless to get out of a financial product if you're a consumer as it was to buy it in the first place. The second is about ensuring that how a customer will experience a new product has been properly tested and understood before it's launched, rather than after. For example, having to build in manual overrides for staff to enable a product to be offered appropriately is clearly storing up problems for the future. And these are the risks that we have seen crystallize into reality and remediation in the last few years. And when you recognize or hear that some products are clearly low value or poor for a large number of customers, work at pace to remove or replace them on your books. Ask yourselves, are you taking extra care to ensure consumers understand your product if it is particularly complex? How are you considering consumer behavioral biases like inertia? So for you and your teams, it means that I am looking at moving beyond a mindset of regulation being for the compliance department. It's a continuous boardroom discussion. And for us, as I've said previously, it's not about catching firms out. Instead, it's about working with you to build trust that you will deliver the outcomes that work for your customers. If you've done this properly, if you've really genuinely been thinking in this way throughout your business, I really want to move to a situation where the important steps to delivering regulatory requirements are really much, much easier. This doesn't mean, and you're going to expect me to say this, that the FMA's approach of credible deterrence is changing. It's always going to be there to tackle the most egregious examples of misconduct. When we take action, as we do and will, I want it to be in a manner that is seen as fair and proportionate. We will always be prepared to intervene with a deliberate and targeted response with the range of tools we have to correct poor conduct or persistent failures or manage imminent risk of harm. Part of that deterrence outcome includes driving out poor practices, eliminating the pressure for firms to sink to the lowest common denominator. Speaking at this conference 4 years ago, my predecessor observed industry attitudes of, it feels a bit tacky, feels a bit not ethical or right, but you know what? Everyone else is doing it and we can't afford to be left behind. We need together to make sure that these attitudes and practices are simply not there, they're simply not seen as acceptable, and they're left very much behind in the past. An outcomes-based approach for me is about the regulator and firms working together to deliver the right outcomes for New Zealanders. We will support confidence in financial services if consumers believe and experience that we're all focused on, committed to building a level of mutual trust to secure customers getting the right products at the right time, and that they meet, that the expectations that they have of them come real in practice. I've been asked to touch briefly on value for money. My colleague Paul Gregory will be going into more detail on this later in the conference, and I know this topic has attracted quite a lot of interest. New Zealand is an international outlier here. The idea of fair value, from my experience, is driven very much through the UK approach. And the UK approach, as many of you know, is very much focused on aiming for consumers to receive fair price and quality. In a speech last year, the chair of the FCA in the UK noted that firms need to demonstrate and be accountable to their customers for whether their funds really deliver value to their customers as an outcome. The outcome we are seeking to achieve here is the same: for fund managers to demonstrate to KiwiSaver members and other investors that they are delivering value for money based on the risk investors are taking and the fees they are paying. There is value in financial advice, in helping people make good decisions and avoid bad ones. We know this, and we want to encourage financial advice. The outcome we all must seek is more knowledgeable consumers with higher levels of financial confidence and greater participation. Value for money is absolutely not about driving an approach that is solely focused on low-cost passive funds. It is about driving an approach that delivers value for KiwiSaver members and investors, that helps them to meet their goals. This delivers trust and confidence in the sector, and is why we, the FMA as a regulator, are committed to advocating for investors and looking after their interests. So, at the start of my speech, I talked about how great it was we can all be together again, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the day and the evening to come. But we are in the middle of a period of uncertainty. Interest rates are rising, there's a war in Eastern Europe. The last few years have been difficult ones wherever you have been. And that's why it will be vital that you identify and look after your vulnerable customers in the months ahead. This will be critical to the building and maintaining of public confidence in your industry. I'm committed to engaging with you at all times. It's important to me that you're involved, engaged, and feel heard, particularly when it comes to implementing the new regimes over the next few years. We will walk with you on this, and we will hold you to account where necessary, but as we expect you also to hold us to account, we will continue to work closely with you in the wider industry, as well as our Council of Financial Regulator partners, on a financial sector that works well for everyone. Because it's only by working together that we can deliver our shared goal, growing the confidence and financial well-being of all New Zealanders. Thank you. Ngā mihi tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Samantha. It's great to have you here for your first FSC conference, and great to be here in person. Just a gentle reminder to everyone here, if you have any questions, if you have any partai, make sure you send them through via the app, and I'll try and get to those in a couple of minutes. This is, your 9th month in your new role, I think? You joined the FMA in February, Te Mana Tātai Hoko Hoko. People in the industry are still getting to know you a little bit. Yeah. So what actually brought you to Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Well, as sort of I said, I was born in the UK, but my parents emigrated when I was a very little girl, and in New Zealand, I lived here for the first, the 20 formative years of my life, and there's very much me that's, made in New Zealand, really. And so, although I went back, as a lot of New Zealanders do, for 1 year, I ended up staying about 28 years and having my career and family in the UK and Europe. But I always really wanted to come back here and bring my skills and experience, and the role of the FMA was just an amazing opportunity to come back and give so much. I really want to give a lot back to the country that gave me and my family so much.
You've got a lot of experience overseas. How does New Zealand compare?
Yeah, so I think New Zealand's got a fantastic opportunity, because yes, we are late to a few things. We're only just implementing, a kind of in-depth regime for financial advice. We are just on the cusp of implementing a regime for regulating the conduct of insurers and banks. And many countries in the rest of the world have been doing this not just for years, but in some cases, 10 to 20 or more years. But it does give us, so we've got that difference, but it does give us a really big opportunity here to learn from the mistakes that have been made and what has worked and hasn't worked. And I think one of the lessons that we learnt in regulating for advice and regulating generally is that a whole lot of detailed rules often don't deliver the outcomes that are required. A whole lot of reams and reams of disclosure to consumers doesn't necessarily mean that they make good choices in financial services. So we've got a real opportunity to learn from that and add to it and really show how it can be done.
The Financial Markets Amendment Bill was passed in June, I think, which requires bank insurers and lenders to obtain a customer relations licence from the FMA. Do you have any reflections as to the sector-wide culture in New Zealand when it comes to customer relations?
So I think actually I'll slightly sort of turn that question around a bit. We did because it's around sort of customer relations. We've recently done a survey of just over 2,000 consumers, a random survey, and some have heard me say this before. I was a bit taken aback to see the result that less than 30% of New Zealanders would know how to make a complaint to their insurance company or bank if they'd received poor service. And that speaks to, I think, the kind of work that needs to be done to build a confident, trusted relationship with customers. It's pretty fundamental. Things go wrong. It's pretty fundamental that customers of banks and insurance companies have a really clear pathway if something goes wrong, and they know how to get it resolved.
You spoke about the industry and the sector going through a significant period of change. For regulators, for industry, for customers, what do you want to see at the end of that period of change? What is your vision?
Yeah. So picking, starting with customers, that they are getting the products they need when they need them, they do what they reasonably expect them to do, and they've got confidence and trust in their financial providers, that they're confident that they're going to get treated well and get treated fairly, and that their interests are genuinely being taken into account. For industry, I want, I'm looking for their experience of working with us as a regulator to have been a strong one, that they understand, that they've got a strong understanding of why the regulatory requirements matter, that the discussions around delivering great outcomes and delivering regulatory requirements are happening at the boardroom. They're not kind of shoved down into the compliance departments or legal departments, that they're genuinely genuinely, the outcomes that are being achieved are genuinely discussed as a matter of routine at the board. Just a few of those changes there.
The FMA is growing, you have a greater remit,
Yeah.
you have more teeth. People like me think automatically that means more enforcement,
Yeah.
you'll be cracking the whip. But talk to me about your approach, because you want to involve, you want to take a slightly more engagement-focused approach when it comes to working with the sector.
And that's building on the approach the FMA have taken. I mean, I'm building, it's a great start. The FMA have got a strong reputation for their engagement with the industry. I'm wanting to build on that, so I'm wanting to kind of create ever-trusting relationships between the FMA and the industry. So on enforcement, you don't start with enforcement, but it's really important it's there as a tool. So when you're bringing in new regimes, our first approach is education, guidance, support. And then when the regimes come into being, that again, it's kind of focused on, very much giving as much opportunity for firms to be able to understand what they need to do, that we're working hard to support that. But at the end of the day, there's a point when you say, look, we've said this once, we've said this 2 times, we've provided all these opportunities, and you're still not doing it. That we need to act, and that's when we will use the various tools that we have at our disposal. It's also important. I think there's two comments on that I'd like to make as well. The first is underlining a point I made just before. You all put a huge amount of effort into implementing new regimes and complying with the new regimes, and it's just not fair. It's not just a matter for consumer protection. It's just not fair if you see others who are getting away with not doing that and are making even more profits as a result of not doing that. And the second is that we also need to act incredibly quickly, and you'll see we do this through our stop orders and things like that. If we see imminent risk of harm, we won't spend ages navel-gazing and discussing over cups of tea. We will move very quickly if there's urgent action that's required.
You're coming with an outside perspective of sorts, so from your time in the role so far, how would you say that the industry and the sector is taking this engagement-led approach? Are they being proactive?
So I actually think this is very much with the New Zealand style. So I'm actually finding it much easier and more straightforward to engage with all of you and with the industry here. And I think that's down to culture. It's down to being Kiwis.
Uncertainty is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. You touched on it in your speech. So what would be your message to consumers and investors regarding the uncertainty of this moment, and how can firms try and provide a little bit more certainty in the average household's life?
Yeah, no, great question. I'm going to lead out with really identifying vulnerability, remembering that we can all be vulnerable customers and consumers depending upon what's going on in our lives. When things go wrong in our lives, for whatever reason, we're never at our best when it comes to making decisions and financial decisions. Being in times of economic volatility just makes that worse. So I think really strong focus on who are your vulnerable consumers, and really thinking about how you can support their needs with information and help. For investors, the younger ones, much younger than me, who are experiencing volatile markets and inflation for the first time. I still remember back in the bad old days when inflation here was around 22-23%. To understand that actually they need to hold their nerve a bit, invest for the long term. Things do smooth out over time. So that I think there's kind of a few messages that we can give in this period of time.
How does financial literacy within consumers compare in New Zealand to overseas?
It's probably not much different. There's a lot of work to do on financial literacy the world over. It's a big focus for international regulatory organisations. Some of you will be aware of an organisation called IOSCO, the International Organisation of Securities Regulators. They run every year sort of a whole kind of investor education week where where we, as regulators the world over, really think about what we can do in our countries and communities to build greater financial literacy. It becomes more important because our financial lives are more complicated now than perhaps they were in generations ago, and the need for people to think about what risks do they need to manage through insurance products, how do they save for the long term at the same time as supporting their families. There's just a lot more work to do here, and I think the earlier speaker this morning, it's at home and it's in schools to start with, and getting some great education going on there.
Some thoughtful questions from the floor. You mentioned value for money in regards to managed funds and KiwiSaver. So how does New Zealand compare internationally on that front?
So I think some of the work that the FMA has done to really, with you guys, with the industry, to really get quite a strong focus on value for money, it has had an impact on fees, and I think that is, that's been really good to see. Generally we've got probably a wee bit further to go when it comes to some of the value that's coming through in some of the around the fees and the value for money coming through experience in investment products. I think it's something we just need to keep a continuous. I'm really looking for the industry to sort of keep a really continuous eye on.
You talk of outcomes seeming to be more aligned with the new UK consumer duty. Are you seeking to shift New Zealand to the higher bar beyond treating customers fairly?
So policy and legislation is a matter for the government. I think that where the FCA have gone with their consumer duty is sending out some really important thinking that we might want to reflect on when we're looking at the work that we're doing here in New Zealand on the fair conduct programs. So I think there's some alignment there. I think it's interesting material that's coming out from the UK. I don't really see any reason why that should require any legislative changes at our end at all. I think we've got actually a really good, strong set of legislation to support the good outcomes.
Samantha, you said this is a bit of a tough question. You said reams of paper are not wanted, but that seems inconsistent with the value for money templates, which literally require hundreds of data points be filled per fund. The data that easily identifies outlier funds with things like egregious performance fees, etc., are already known by supervisors. So why are the rhetoric and expectations not aligned?
Okay. Great question. So the outcome that we're looking for is that fair value is demonstrated. The form that is being used is one that we asked for, but it's not compulsory to use it. So it's completely open to funds to say, actually, we don't want to do that. We don't want to use that template. We are going to demonstrate fair value to you in a different way. So there's a bit of a challenge there.
Right. How will the FMA set industry up for success on COFI conduct regulation, particularly providing clarity on guidance and incentive regulations well in advance of go live?
Oh gosh, can you repeat that?
Sorry. How will the FMA set industry up for success on COFI conduct regulation, particularly providing clarity on guidance and incentive regulations well in advance of go live?
Well, we will. So on all of the COFA requirements, we will continue to do what we have been doing, which is work in a kind of a range of ways. For example, recently we've been running a whole series of workshops between providers and advisors to make sure that there's some clarity around how the COFI and FSLA regimes intersect. We'll be doing, with all of the aspects of implementing COFA, we'll be working in that way. So it's not just we're going to put out reams of paper for people to read. We will be looking for very responsive, quite active sort of engagement so that we can understand what support you need from us, and that it's, the guidance and things that we come out. And by the way, with guidance, we need to take care that we don't kind of turn guidance into a whole kind of new level of prescription again. It will, it's guidance, but certainly I want to work in a very kind of, now we're not in COVID, that we can do the workshops and coming together to work things through, and that is very much, we will continue to do that.
I know we're running out of time. There are several more quite considered questions here, so perhaps if you've submitted those and I haven't got to them, you might be able to track Samantha down in the hallway afterwards.
Just grab me.
One final question. I know you've been heavily involved in theatre all of your life. So what do you enjoy about acting and directing? How does that compare to a stage like this?
Oh yeah, well, a few people know that I had a choice to make in my early 20s, which is, do I go to stage school or do I take up the offer of a graduate position at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand? And I decided to go to the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, but instead have pursued a really strong hobby, not more than that. I mean, I've probably done about over 90 plays in my life together, so it's a huge passion of mine. Don't have time to do it at the moment. What do I like about it? I guess it's around it's around kind of the artistic merit of kind of doing plays, but also I love the whole team building. What I've really taken from my work in theatre is how you take something that's dry and on a page, script, or in our case, regulation, dry and on a page, and you bring it to life into something that's real and creative, and you work as part of a team to do that. And that's how I like to work as a regulator.
Fantastic. On that note, congratulations on your appointment. Good luck in the role, and please, homai te paki paki, show your applause to the Chief Executive of the FMA, Samantha Barrass.
On behalf of the FSC conference, thank you very much to Jack for leading that discussion, and for Samantha for making herself available to talk to us. I think over your really short time in the saddle, you've made a real point about becoming visible and meeting all of the industry. I suspect that frustrated actress in you is shown out here by wanting to be on the stage and talk through it. You do that very well, so thank you very much for sharing your vision and thoughts for what the FMA is targeting and the plan ahead.